Well, here's my pile of strips. I'm getting ready to run through the planer to smooth one surface. And again, when I glue these strips together, I'm going to want to have one saw curve surface against a plane surface. That allows me to get a better grain pattern going around. If I planed both edges, I'd be losing more of the board, and so the grain wouldn't be as continuous as it went around the form. But I found by planing one surface, it gives me an almost invisible glue joint. I actually had to combine two boards to get enough width to get my 4-inch piece of trim that I'm making today. But as long as I keep them bending the same way that they came off the board, it's going to look great and the grain will just bend right around there. Another thing that's really important to remember is measure around the form, make sure that you've got several extra inches, because you can lose almost a foot of length when you get around the outside radius of that piece of trim. And of course the curved blank that we make, we're always going to want to be a good 3-4 inches longer than the finished piece of trim on each end. As I run these strips through the planer, I'm going to put the numbers down. It's almost impossible to actually keep the strips in order while you're planing them, so I usually don't bother. What we're going to do now is just start sorting them out by number, and then we'll get them all lined up the way we want to glue them together. Let's see, here's 15. Put that in front. It is important to try and select a piece without a lot of knots. Let's see, that can go in there. And you get to look and you can still see where our boards have the indexing marks on them. There they all are. So what number are we at here? Well, we've ended up with several more pieces than we actually need. So what we'll do is just use enough of the strips to end up where it measures about 1/16 of an inch more than we want our final piece of trim to be. I always want to glue up something that's a little bit wider, because I want to just do a little bit of edge sanding on the outside after the glue up's done to get it to close to an exact radius. So we're looking for a 4-inch piece of finished trim. That's about 4 1/16 on pinch it together. And you can see the V groove has come back together. Now this is the second board we used, and so the mark on it is a little further over. But when I glue this back together, I still need to see this V going in this direction. There's a lot of different ways to make a form to bend curved trim around. This is a form that we've made for a 24-inch radius window trim. It's a real simple process, and that's the way I like to do things. What I've done is drawn a circle, a little more than half a circle actually, on this piece of OSB. It's always important to mark a line that is going to be what I call the baseline, or that's the point where the straight trim is going to meet the curved trim when we install it. And then, as you can see, the form actually continues about 6 inches past that. That's really important to have your curved piece of trim blank be longer than the actual installed piece of molding, because you're always going to have a little bit of snipe or a little bit of wondering when you're feeding it in and it's leaving the machine. We drew the radius using a couple of trammel points. These attach to just about any kind of a stick of wood. These will actually attach to a piece of 2x4. You could draw a 16-inch radius circle with this. If you screwed two boards together, you could draw a 32-foot radius. But they'll also clamp down on something as small as a ½ inch thick. Once I drew the radius, I screwed these brackets to the piece of OSB. And again, what I really like about this method of building a form is I can pretty well build anything I can draw on a piece of plywood. These brackets are simply a piece of angle iron that's been cut about 1.5 inches wide. This is 5/16 angle iron. Sometimes I've used 1/4 inch, but the most important thing is make sure that it's square. These pieces of angle iron were cut off of a long piece using a metal cutting bandsaw. If you try and have them sheared, it'll bend it out a square. So make sure you pay a little bit extra, get someone at the metal shop to cut them with a bandsaw. And then all I did was go to a drill press and put 3 holes in them so that I could use 3 screws to screw them down to my piece of OSB. These are probably about 6 inches on center. Now, there's also a piece of metal bent around the L brackets, and it's simply a piece of 1/8 inch thick flat metal. For a casing trim glue up, I'm using 3 inch tall metal. If you notice, I've got some 1.5 by 1.5 boards here. They're doing 2 different things for me. One, they're helping hold the piece of metal against the brackets, but also when I put the strips on top of them, they keep them far enough up above the plywood so that when I'm clamping, my knuckles aren't right down against the plywood. I mentioned clamps. I've modified some clamps to use for this, and they really make it go fast. They work well for me. This is a C-clamp. It's a very heavy C-clamp, an 8-inch C-clamp that we cut the end off of and welded a nut on. You do have to be a pretty good welder to make this work, but if you're going to do a lot of this, this is a great way to go. There may even be some clamps like this out there available. You could do the same thing with regular C-clamps if you wanted to, just have to do a little bit more turning. Or you can use a K-body clamp. These are great because they exert equal pressure all the way across the jaw, and you can get a lot of clamping pressure. It's still slower than the other method, but you can do it, and a lot of people have K-body clamps already, and they're certainly ready available from a lot of different spots. The only difference is probably this is going to be a little bit more work, and instead of maybe 2 people doing up a glue up like this, you might need a 3rd person. 2 other things are really important to have when you're doing strip laminated glue ups: plastic gloves to protect your hands from the glue, and some form of wax. What this wax does for me is keeps all the drippings of glue from sticking to my OSB, and especially keeps my glue up from sticking to these boards, so it'll come right off when I get there.